afternoon. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Mobile Apps, How to Plan, Execute, and Launch, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. Save the date for our next webinar in the Digital Bootcamp series, Keeping Up with Digital Marketing, A's for Your Q's, ChatGPT. That will happen on March 27th at noon, and I'll drop that link into the chat momentarily. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted and the chat feature is turned off. But if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We will address them at the end of the session. We've also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's session, Cameron Nelson, CEO of Tenzing Startup Consultants. Cameron has over 20 years of experience in technology as a senior tech consultant in Silicon Valley, helping Fortune 500 companies improve their digital marketing and e-commerce. At the same time, he founded several tech companies, including a software as a service website for tree preservation and a blockchain platform for nonprofits. Cameron is accomplished in language, culture, has an MBA and an MA, and believes that new technology products have the ability to help shape our world for the better. Please join me in welcoming our presenter for today, Cameron Nelson.
Thank you for the introduction, and hello everybody. Welcome to this session on mobile apps, how to plan, execute, and launch for your small business. I'm looking at the attendees list and I see some familiar names, so welcome back to those of you who I know and I've spoken with, and for everybody who's new, welcome to this session. I hope it'll be informative to give a broad understanding of what mobile app development is like in a business scenario and how it can benefit your small business or startup. I'm assuming that people here don't necessarily have prior experience in this field with developing websites or apps, so I'm going to be covering the basics and also giving some more intermediate and advanced type of techniques and strategies to help make sure that your app development is successful for your business. And this has been updated for 2025. Every 3 or 4 months, there's pretty significant changes in how apps are developed for small businesses and really make the most use out of a small budget. So I have taken those cues and updated this presentation. So this information is really relevant and up to date for the beginning of 2025. So with that, let's jump right into it. The first thing I want to discuss is should your small business be considering developing an app? An app isn't necessarily the right route for everybody to go down. There's other options to connect with your market and to sell your products. So let's talk about this. So as we probably all know, the mobile app market is crowded. There's just a lot of apps already in the app stores. So before embarking on spending money on developing an app for your business, you really need to know, is it the right strategy for you to be pursuing? So there's 2 main stores. There's the iOS and Apple store, which has about 2.5 million apps currently. And this store generated over $100 billion in total sales in all of 2024. If you can compare that to the other competitor in this space, which is the Android Google App Store, it has significantly more apps, but you'll see even a smaller amount of total sales. So this indicates that the apps that end up on iOS tend to cost a bit more, even though there's fewer of them. So they're kind of a higher quality app that ends up there at a higher price point. And so it really depends on where your target market is and what type of platform they're using, of which of these 2 platforms is going to give you the most bang for your buck for your business. So you really do need to understand your demographics and what devices they're using. But regardless of what platform you're going to target, the global app economy is very, very large indeed, almost $1 trillion worth of in-app purchases last year. So what are some of the advantages and also some of the cautions when you would consider developing an app for your small business? First, the advantages. Mobile apps are used by billions of people in the US and worldwide. Apps provide a great opportunity for engagement with your customers because you can easily get reviews and feedback in the app and in the app stores. They provide you an opportunity to increase your customer acquisition because if your business has an app in one of the app stores, that is a new search platform for people to find out about you. And there's numerous ways to create mobile apps. So depending on your budget and depending on your needs and the features that you want in your app, there can be options that are faster and cheaper. So there's a lot of good options. You're not stuck to one type of development. And with an app, you have a lot of profit potential, and with the different revenue models I'm going to show you versus a business model with a high overhead. You do have some overhead when it comes to launching and maintaining an app, but in general, it's much lower than having a brick and mortar store and all of those associated costs. So what are some of the cautions? Well, I've worked with probably 50 small businesses in the last 5 or 6 years in developing apps, and I know that they can be very challenging for a first-time business owner trying to develop an app because they can get very complex. The scope which you initially think you want in your app, the features can easily get blown out of proportion and blow up your budget, and the time it takes can get longer. The ways to mitigate this I will talk about throughout the presentation, but this is one of the biggest risks and challenges that I see small business owners getting into. Secondly, unexpected issues can arise, again, for first-time app creators such as yourself. Everything from picking the right development team, to understanding your market, to actually designing, developing, and then promoting that app. There's a lot of unknowns here for the first time, so I'm going to be covering as many of those topics as I can today. And of course, I encourage your questions at the end. The next one is if the app fails to come up with a new or innovative solution. So there's a lot of apps out there for any given problem that an app is trying to solve. There might be a dozen or even 100 different competitive apps trying to do something very, very similar. So you need to make sure you're not just going to come up with another app without a unique approach or an innovative solution to that problem. Otherwise, you'll probably just be wasting your time and money. Next is if the business does not have enough funds to finish the app. Because as you go and develop, especially for the first time, you might end up thinking of new features in the middle of the development process you feel like you really need to have. This is very common, and it's not a huge problem, but you do need to have extra funds available to account for that. I would always recommend about a buffer of about 10% extra. So if your budget and the estimate for your app is, say, $3,000, I'd have a 10% buffer because you will probably use that on things you really want along that process. And the last thing I'll caution is hiring the wrong development team. Picking the right team that actually understands your needs, understands the app development and the design that can be in line with what you're thinking and what your target market wants is not as easy as you would hope it would be. And so hiring the wrong team can be a big problem for first-time developers. So those are some of the advantages and risks. But now let's talk about some of the trends and really what's happening in the app landscape in early 2025. The first trend to point out here is that the free apps, which are 98% of app revenue on the stores, they highlight the importance of these things called the in-app purchases, advertising, and alternate means of monetization. So most of the apps and most of that revenue is not coming from a paid app where you have to buy it before you can use it. The model here is really shifted to giving away the apps for free and making money in in-app purchases, subscriptions, and other means, which we'll talk about. Second is the rise of progressive web apps. This is a trend that has become more popular in the last year or so. This is essentially not an app at all. It's a website that you develop that you can use very similarly to an app with some advantages. First off, mobile web apps are websites that can launch in a full screen mode on a phone or tablet. So it looks like it's an app. It doesn't look like it's running in the browser, but it is running in the browser. Secondly, they can be made to function offline. You don't always need an internet connection like you do with a normal website. Next, they can send push notifications or any notifications to the user's phone, just like a normal app. And lastly, they have much faster load times than a traditional website. And we'll talk about progressive web apps in the context of your other development options. Third is AI. Of course, AI with ChatGPT and a lot of other competitors are really becoming widespread in a lot of online applications. You can use AI right now, and your development team can use AI to make developing apps smarter. You can have automated user support chatbots. We're seeing this in, I would say, over 50% of business websites to date are now using AI chatbots, which are actually, I think, a big step up from the previous automated chatbots you'd have to interact with, but probably not as good as humans. But this is something that is being improved upon all the time. And AI is also able to offer more predictive analytics as far as viewing the behaviors of your users in the apps. And for you as the business owner, this gives you really good guidance into how they're interacting with your product, what they're liking and not liking about your app, so you can increase your satisfaction and your revenue over time. Talking about revenue models, there's a few trends in the traditional in-app purchases, subscription, or one-off purchasing of app models that are kind of the traditional ones. One of these are microtransactions, and another is subscription bundles. And we're going to talk about those two as well as the more traditional ones a little bit later in the presentation. And the last trend to note here is what's called a no-code or a low-code app development. And this is a platform that offers the ability for anybody who's not a developer to kind of drag and drop and build an app that can be launched on the app stores like any other app. And they're getting much better than they used to be. So this is an option if you want to do this yourself and not hire a development team to actually write code, because you don't need to code, or in some cases, low code, for those of you who might know a little bit. So going over some of the trends, now I want to look at what are your options here in choosing the right way to develop your app. And I know there's a lot of information on this chart. This is a new chart for 2025 because I used to talk about here on this slide only Android and iOS. I just had that information, and that was sufficient for a year or two ago, but now we're talking about Flutter, and we're talking about progressive web apps, so I brought that in because if you're ignoring those as your options, then you're missing out on potentially the best path forward for your business's app. So let's take a little bit of time. We'll talk about this. The first option here we're going to talk about is Android, and that's at the top because it does have the largest market share. In the US, about 35 to 40% of smartphone users are on Android, smartphone and tablet. The development cost for developing on Android I would consider is moderate. The development time is going to be moderate to high. The approval process, and anytime you are a new developer or you're submitting a new app, you have to get it approved. And this is to make sure people aren't submitting viruses or illegal apps. And so Android has a pretty easy and fast approval process. It can take literally just 24 hours, sometimes a bit longer. Some of the pros for developing on Android is that it has very good performance, just developing for the Android operating system. It's very high performance, high flexibility, meaning all of the sensors on the user's phone, the GPS, if you want to access that, the camera, you can access the sensors. If the user gives you permission, you can, of course, make use of the full phone to really make your app do what you need it to do. Now, some of the cons with Android is that there's a many different manufacturers of Android phones. We've probably heard of Samsung, Nokia. There are dozens and dozens. And because of the differences in manufacturing, your app might not work as well on some devices as opposed to others. And this is just an issue faced by Android, always has been, and it probably will be into the future. And I think Android app, building your app for Android is really going to be best if your business is targeting a broad user base. Again, it has the most market share. And especially if your demographics are those that are in a medium or lower income category, as they tend to be skewed more towards Android users. Now, the next major platform here is the Apple or iOS platform with 30 to 35% market share. For its development costs, it's a higher development cost. The developer hourly rates tend to be slightly higher with iOS. It's more of a specialized skill set. The development time here is moderate, and the approval process is more strict and then therefore can be longer. It can take several days, even a week, in some cases. The pros with iOS is that it does offer superior performance. So in some situations, Apple phones can be better at executing something. They can be faster than Android. Depends a little bit about exactly what the feature is. And they generally have a higher revenue potential, as we saw, with a smaller number of apps on the iOS store, but generating higher revenue for those app creators. The con here is that it can have a higher development cost because of the more premium skill set and the longer approval process typically. Now, if your company is aiming for a high income demographic, in North America especially, iOS can be a really good choice. So those are the two app stores. So what are these other two options? Flutter is what's considered a development language that's hybrid. And your developer can write your app in Flutter and it will be published on both app stores and look identical. So you might say, wow, this sounds great. You can pay for one app to be made and it'll go to both stores. That is true, and that's the promise and the goal. There are some limitations, of course. So right now, about 20 to 25% of apps are written in Flutter or a very similar hybrid programming language. The development cost here is lower because you can write one app and have it deployed to both stores. So you can typically save 30 to 40% compared to developing for Android and iOS natively in their own code languages. Also, the development time is shorter. The approval process is going to be very similar to the Android and iOS native development paths. The pro here again, one code base for both of your iOS and Android apps. The con is that sometimes, and even though Flutter is updated regularly, there's occasional limitations in what it can achieve in the app or what sensors it can read or what function it can perform because it's not natively written in iOS or Android language. This is not common. It's very unlikely anybody here would actually run into this, but it is a slight possibility. Also, because it's not written natively in the iOS or Android language, it can be slightly worse in performance, meaning the app could lag or stutter a bit more compared to the native programming language. This is really good, though, I think, for startups and small businesses who need a rapid and cost-effective deployment across both platforms, and they need it fast and they need it cheap. And Flutter can be a very good option for that. And lastly is the progressive web apps. And like I mentioned, this isn't actually an app in the truest sense. It is a website made primarily to work as an app, so it's designed in that form factor. And it can be launched and be full screen and essentially look like an app once it's launched, but it is run not through the app stores. So how does this change it? The development cost here is probably the lowest because it just uses a website technology. The time to develop these is very fast. There is no approval process because it's not on the app stores. And this is also a disadvantage because people won't be able to search the app stores to find your app. The pro here, no app store fees, and it's going to be compatible with any phone, Android, iOS, any tablet, etc., because it's a website that runs in a browser. The con here is that you're going to have much more limited access to hardware features. You maybe can't tap into the GPS to find users' location or the mic or the camera or whatever your app might need access to. It's going to be much more limited here. So if you're really budget conscious or you're trying to build like a B2B solution that doesn't need to look as elegant or be as fancy as a real app, or various other scenarios, then the progressive web apps, they've become more popular recently, and it could be a good solution for you. So I know this was a lot of information, and if you do have any questions about the right platform, then feel free to ask those at the end. So now you should have some idea of which platform or platforms you are gravitating towards to develop your app on. And whichever platforms you end up going with, these 8 steps are going to be the same, and they're going to be key to making your app successful. So we're going to be talking about these in more detail. The first step is doing your market research. It's never a good idea to build an app until you have a really good idea of who is your target audience. How is your app going to be useful to them, and therefore why are they going to pay for it in some way? You want to be making sure that it solves a problem for them. The second factor is scoping the app. And this is defining a list of features. It can be a bullet point list. It's a very good way to communicate with your developer. You want to identify those features that are critical to have to make your app meet the needs of your market. But there's inevitably going to be more features you can't budget for. And those will be something that'll be kind of a nice to have feature. And they can be fit in if things go faster than expected and cheaper, or they can be held off to a later date. This is also the time to define the minimum viable product, which I'm going to talk about more. And this is kind of that list of those critical features that you definitely need in your app. Step number 3 is how do you find a developer and get a good budget? We're going to be talking about ways to look on onshore versus offshore options and reading reviews to find the right developer. Step number 4 is how do you factor in the app with your existing business profits and loss, your revenue and expenses? How much are you going to invest of your business's revenue in the app creation, and what's your return on investment? You should be thinking about the app as a part of your business's operations to enhance it and, of course, increase your revenue and your profits. Step number 5 is your marketing approach. So things like building buyer personas, different people who will be using your app for different needs and purposes, understanding where they are reading communication and learning about things like your products so you know where to advertise to them, and building that advertising strategy. Step number 6 is creating a prototype of your app, also called an MVP, or that minimum viable product. Your developer will be doing this with a lot of your guidance and insight, and then you'll be incorporating user feedback and fixing bugs or changing things around a little bit. This is the iteration step. This is very important before you launch your app, that you need some time to let it be tested by other users other than yourself. Step number 7 is launching the app. You can have a beta test, and we'll talk about different forums. And lastly, the app is ready. Version 1.0 is released on the store. It's a very exciting day. And now it's time to really start promoting the app. You can be converting leads you've acquired into the paying customers you need and promoting yourself on social media and through other events. So, step number 1, how do you complete this market research? Well, one of my favorite quotes from a successful entrepreneur said, find a big problem that's just going to get worse and fix it. And fix it in a unique and innovative way, I would add. So how would you go about finding this big problem? Well, the first step is, if you're going to conduct market research, first thing you should be doing is interviewing people, speaking to them in person, text messages, emails, social media, any form. You're going to be listening and gathering information and data. And when you gather your data, you want to keep a focus on what questions you ask relatively narrow. Because if you just ask, well, do you want an app that will help you save money when buying groceries? And then you get, 500 different answers to that question. You're going to have too much and dispersed data to help you make critical decisions on how your app should be made. So you should focus your data collection on just some specific things that you really want to know about. A good way to do this is by using forms that can help you collect data. You can either send these out and hope people will fill them out on their own, but this often doesn't happen because, think about it. Of how many survey forms you've gotten in your life, how many have you actually taken 5 minutes to fill out? It's much more effective to try to get them on the phone or talk to them. You can fill out the form on their behalf and kind of fill in their answers and get that data that way. And step number 4 is to always say thank you, because a lot of the people who were willing to talk to you and give you some feedback might become early users, and hopefully they love the app and tell other people about it. So it's a really crucial way of promoting your app at its inception. Now, AI tools have made this step quite a bit easier in the last 6 or 12 months. There's some really cool AI tools here, Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, and even Google Analytics that help you build surveys and analyze that data using AI. And this is a very, very convenient way. If you have done 50 surveys and you have 50 sources of data, sure, you could have gotten a bar chart or a graph in the olden days to kind of summarize that, but some of these AI tools can give you a lot faster and much more powerful insights into finding the trends to help you make decisions about your app. So I'd encourage you to check these out when you get to this stage, and they can really accelerate this and make it easier. The second critical factor in making your app is defining this minimum viable product, because every person with an idea for an app has a list of features that they end up writing down that's very long, and rarely do they have that budget to complete it all 100% at the very beginning. That almost never happens. So the term minimum viable product is talking about the process of making an app that completes each of the elements it needs to have. For example, the pyramid on the right here shows how the minimum viable product takes a little bit of the functionality of the app, the reliability of the app, the usability of the app, and the design of the app, a sliver of each. So you see you can actually build the app with a fraction of the resources, and it will complete each of these tasks at least a little bit. Whereas the pyramid on the left has decided to put all of the resources into building functional and forgetting about everything else. So obviously that app won't work at all. So the benefits of the MVP process, you build the core app first. You can then test it earlier and get more feedback sooner. You can then have much quicker market validation, meaning people don't like it. You can find out before you've built 100% of the pyramid. And lastly, it takes you less time to develop an MVP, and you can maybe start making revenue from it sooner, therefore paving the way for more app development and progress. Another illustration that I like to use is the example of, let's go ahead and build, in this case it's a physical product, but you can use your imagination that this is an app. Let's go ahead and build a product that transports people from one place to another. So you don't want to build a product by saying, okay, we're going to start with a wheel and then connect two of them, and then we're going to have a skateboard thing and then half a car and then a full car, because you won't actually be able to transport people on many of those versions really until you get to the full car. So the better approach here is an MVP. And this one says, okay, we need to transport people. Let's build this skateboard. Let's improve it to a scooter. Let's improve that to a bicycle. Let's improve that to a motorcycle. Let's improve that to a car. So even from the first iteration, it actually performed its function. So that's the goal behind an MVP. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about, and that I see business owners running into this problem all the time, is just not picking the right development team. Because unless you're going to do a no-code app or you can code it on your own, you're going to be interacting with your development team a lot, probably more than you would want to. And it's just inevitable because there's a lot of questions and decisions that have to be made every single day of developing your app. So when it comes to picking a development team, you have two main choices. There's US based, can be here in Virginia, somewhere else in the US, or it can be offshore. Main options here are India, China, and Eastern Europe. So when it comes to the quality of the app, I think that the qualities can be the same between the US and offshore. There's very little difference. And this is because building an app and any coding is very mathematically based, and people in India and China and Europe can do these math formulas just as well as people in the US. So the code ends up, in my experience, being practically the same. The communication in the US is obviously better. Closer time zones, native English speakers. You will have some challenges with communication if you go offshore, But there are some advantages as well. And sometimes if you pick a good team offshore, the communication gap can't be very significant, but sometimes it can be significant. So just something to watch out for. When it comes down to the time it takes to build the app, this is about the same between US and offshore. The cost is significantly higher in the US. Rates will probably start around $100 an hour for a inexperienced person or team to build an app in the US and go up to $150 an hour or more in the US for a better team. Whereas offshore, specifically in India, where I do help people do a lot of app development there, they're about 25% of the cost. So a $100 an hour developer in the US would be about $25 an hour in India. So big cost advantage there going offshore. And lastly is the long-term commitment. Will the developer or the team be willing to stick around and help you next year or in 5 years update and maintain the app? And the good news is both of these locations do like to have those relationships for long term. So usually they're always available to help you fix and update the app. So now that we've talked a little bit about the considerations when picking a developer onshore versus offshore, you're going to have a budget for the app and you're going to need to know how the app is going to make your money back. So this is where we're going to talk about the revenue models. These are the best and the most widely used ways to monetize your app. The first one is in-app advertising. We've all seen this. It's when the little banners pop up somewhere in the app. When you're making the app, you can specify where the banners pop up, how frequently they pop up, and all these different things. So if you want to have a lot of in-app advertising, you can do that. If you want to have very minimal, you can also do that. Pro is that it can make your app free to use because you will derive your revenue from the very small percentage of people who click on banners. It's typically 1 in 1,000. But the con here is that users can be annoyed, of course. The second revenue model is in-app purchases. You'll make some features free, and then you will have people unlock or pay for certain other things in the app. Now, there's a fee to use the app stores, and I haven't talked about it yet, but the app stores are going to charge 30% of your revenue, and this also includes in-app purchases. So if you make $100 a month in the purchases, they do take 30%. That's going to be true with any revenue derived from the app. The only one that's not susceptible to this is those web applications that are actually a website that just kind of look like an app, but they're not available on the stores. Any app available on the stores is going to be charged the fee. The next revenue model is a bundled subscription. So this is a relatively new thing. We've seen subscriptions and apps for a long, long time. Bundled subscriptions, they save users money because you kind of buy a bunch of upgrades in the app together. So instead of a $3 and a $3 and a $3, you kind of bundle those together and they get a monthly subscription for $5 and they've upgraded the app. So they get a little discount. It's not really going to be suitable for all types of apps, though, and it really depends on how your app is made. The next revenue model that's very popular is freemium. So you give the app away for completely free, and then you will have certain features of similar to in-app purchases, but certain features are going to be free and others will be paid. And you have to determine which ones are free and which ones are paid, and it can be very difficult to do that correctly. Next are paid apps. This is just when you have to pay, $1.99 or $5.99 or whatever you want to buy the app before you can download it. The pro is that it's a very predictable revenue source. You earn it in advance, which is very nice. But the con here is that there's a lot of competition. And if there's a free version of an app similar to yours, it's a hard sell to make somebody pay up front. And you will also lose 30% of those fees to the App Store. And the last one I'll talk about are dynamic microtransactions. Now, this is relatively new because it's actually using features that AI has enabled to adjust prices in the app based on a lot of factors like the user's engagement, meaning where they go in the app, what they click on, how much time they spend in it, their spending patterns, and a lot of other factors that you can program in. So if you have a casual user who doesn't use your app very much, they might see lower prices and special offers to encourage them to get a trial that might upgrade to a paid subscription later. Whereas a highly engaged user might receive an expensive premium offer that the other user was very unlikely to care about. And the nice thing is, you're not manually doing this for every user. AI is able to adjust this on the fly. So it's pretty interesting. I think a lot of app revenue is headed this way because AI can just react much more quickly and nuanced than any person could. And they also have access, it has access to all the data, the user data. The con here is that users could have a feeling of, well, the pricing is changing on me. It's maybe exploitive. It's a possibility. So you'd want to make sure that you have considered that factor if you're going to do something like the dynamic microtransactions. And of course, these six don't need to be taken individually. You can mix and match. So there's a lot of consideration that should be put in here is how is your app going to make money for your business? The next step is marketing your app. So you can do this by first, you're going to, number one, identify where your target customers are and build buyer personas to help break them into segments so you can understand them better. Secondly, you want to determine what each of these segments, what are their needs, what are their wants, where are they going to get their information? You can then formulate a marketing message specifically talking to their needs, solving their specific problem. You don't want your marketing to be general or generic. That rarely succeeds, especially online. So, really tailoring that very specifically. You can go ahead and get feedback from potential customers or people in your target market and hone in on your marketing approach. And third, you want to build strategies to reach your customers. You can use AI nowadays to really help you with crafting strategies, targeting a certain market after you've identified the market. You do need to spend some of your own time talking, doing interviews, but then you can use AI tools. And the presentation next month is all on using AI tools for small businesses. We do talk about in that session using AI for marketing. So I encourage you to come to that next month. It's on the SBDC's calendar. And when it comes to some more strategies for how to market your app, there's something called the App Store Optimizations, or ASO. And these are some strategies, kind of like SEO or search engine optimization for websites, helps you rank higher in an app store search result. So maybe you have a baking app, how to make the world's best chocolate chip cookies. Somebody searches the Google Play Store for chocolate chip cookie baking app or something similar. It's like Google search, on the websites, you want to be at the top. So App Store optimizations is a technique for using the right words and phrases to make sure you're high there. Secondly, you can use influencer marketing to help market your app. This can be done on social media, Instagram, YouTube. And lastly is user-generated content. So if you have the ability for your users to post images or videos of them somehow taken with your app or interacting with your product and post them to their social media pages and tag you. This is a great feedback loop, and some companies have used this very successfully to become huge. One example that comes to mind is GoPro, the makers of those action cameras. Their whole marketing strategy for over a decade has been taking user-submitted action shots using the GoPro cameras, surfing or paragliding or whatever, and making really cool promotional materials out of the user videos, having competitions, and they basically don't need to generate any of their content. It's all done for them. So thinking of ways to get some sort of user-generated content will really help you market your app online. Now, as step number 6 is building a prototype of your app. Now, a prototype kind of looks like this blue image here at the top. It's going to show the flow between the home screen, different buttons, where those go, what those pages look like roughly without much detail. If you have the time to build a prototype of your app now, like before you meet with developers, it's going to save a lot of time and possible grief because you will have thought through things that need to be thought through. And if you leave this up to your developers only, they don't always make the right decisions for you. So I encourage you to spend some time with an app wireframing tool. There's a lot of free ones. A couple that I like are Just in Mind and Mockflow. These are links, so when you get this presentation emailed to you later today or tomorrow, you can just click on these links. You don't need to write all these down. So those links go to those websites. By building wireframes yourself, you can also incorporate user feedback. So you should be conducting interviews, gathering data. You can also be getting user feedback on things like live chat, so Slack, Discord, if you've ever used those. You could, of course, run your surveys like we talked about. You could have social media. You can have a period of a few weeks or a month where you're gathering feedback, working on the wireframes. And I think it's almost guaranteed that if you spend some time doing that before you hire and pay for a developer, you're going to end up with a much better app that's more closely targeted to your market's needs. Because the real weakness of picking a development team and relying on them to build your app 100% is because they are not going to take the time to do these steps that need to be done, right? They might say, sure, we built a baking app before, or maybe an app similar to your, chocolate chip cookie idea. They've done one of those before a couple of years ago. Sure, they can do it. But they don't take the time to really research it like you will because it's your money on the line and it's your business's success. So that's why I always find it's useful for the founder of the business to go through this process. So you're going to really make some good wireframes, and those you're going to be able to present to the developer, impress them with the level of research you've done, and you will get a faster app build cheaper, and also it'll more closely meet your target market's needs if you build a prototype. So step number 7 is you've gone through these phases. Now you're going to launch your app. And typically you launch your app in a beta test. And this is because the users can use it and find bugs, suggestions, maybe find missing features or broken features. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you want to make sure you have a good bunch of testers to help you find that. So there's two types of beta tests that you can opt for, either an open beta test, where you allow anyone from usually a large group who's expressed interest to come and use the app, and they will give you feedback. A closed beta test is going to be something where you will send usually personal invites to a select group of people. So it's going to be smaller, generally speaking. The amount of data won't be as varied, which can be a negative. But if you don't want it accessible to the general public, then a closed beta test is the way you would go. And you will still find out things like missing features or something not explained right in the app from this smaller group. So it just depends on, do you want the large group of unknowns or the small group of known people to help you get this feedback? And once you get the feedback, you're going to be able to launch, like version 1. Version 1 is the first finished version of the app that's available on the app stores. And hopefully at this point, you have, take a day off because you spent now months and a lot of time and effort on this app, and you're tired of it and you're sick of it probably, but it's launched. But, you take your day off and go sit in the sun. And then when you come back, you got to get serious on promoting the app because the success of the app going forward, you can't rely on it just to be found in the app stores, or even if you have a website and you tell people, oh, check out my app, you can't always assume that it's just going to happen on its own. So here's where the very important promotion tactics come in. These 4 promotion tactics I found to be the most effective, just bang for your buck. Obviously, as a business owner, you don't have a lot of time and resources to be promoting an app. So how do you do it most effectively? First thing is having a website. So having a website, either if you have a business website already, you can decide to talk about your app on it and have a link to download it. Or you might decide you want to create a new website for the app. That's fine too. Either way, it's going to show that your business and app, they have more legitimacy. It looks a bit more polished and professional. It'll also show potential customers more information about your app than they're going to get just looking at the description on the App Store. So it's good to have a website talking about your app for that reason. Secondly, is of course using social media. This is probably the single most important factor in advertising and promoting your app and getting more users. Social media marketing takes a ton of energy and effort. It's a real grind sometimes because you're generating content, you're thinking of posts, you're responding to comments. Now, again, you can use AI to help with a lot of this, and I'll talk about that next month. Social media is great because it gives you the organic promotion or exposure. You don't have to pay to be on social media. You can do that for free. And a good tactic to take that doesn't use up a lot of your time is once you've created your social media account where you are informing people about your app, you can search for and follow people in your industry. So again, if we're making an app to make chocolate chip cookies, then there's going to be bakers and famous chefs and people like that. Facebook, Instagram, X, you want to go and follow their accounts as much as you can with your time, maybe even comment or like their posts. And the idea is eventually somebody will notice kind of your page and maybe follow you. And then all of a sudden, their followers have the option to see your posts because, the chef's account is following you. It doesn't always work with, the most world famous chefs, the top 10 or whatever. They're too busy to probably ever even follow anybody back. But you can look for those that are a bit smaller because it works both ways. If you follow them and comment, and they follow you and comment, it helps you both. So it goes both ways there. But you don't always need to target the absolute biggest in your industry. Third is public relations. So presumably in your business, you have a reputation, or maybe you're just starting out with a startup, you have contacts. You want to use your contacts and use your reputation and network a lot to tell people about your app. And you can do things like writing a press release. You can launch a party or some sort of event to celebrate the completion of your app and invite local people, influencers or local media. You can give interviews with influencers or local newspapers or bloggers about your app and again, it's all about the problem you're solving. So you want to find an influencer who's concerned about this topic and say, hey, I made an app to solve this problem. Do you want me to talk about it on your podcast? These types of things can be hugely important for the success of your app, even getting on a couple of podcasts. So don't ignore the value of networking and relations. And that goes along with influencer and celebrity endorsements. Of course, again, if you're starting out, you're small, you're probably not going to get a big celebrity to even pay any attention to you. So you will be looking for people who you feel like maybe they have 10,000 followers or 50,000 followers on a social media platform, not the million follower type because they're too busy. But you can reach out to people, and if you then connect with them, they can promote your app because again, their followers are concerned about the problem you're solving. So that's the angle you take. You're helping solve this problem. Their whole brand is built around solving that problem for their followers, so your app is a natural fit. You want to make sure the influencer really does align with your app's goals, though. If it's off by even a little bit, maybe your app is to make the best chocolate chip cookies, and their brand is about baking the best croissants. They might say, no, it's both food, but it's not quite a croissant. So they're not going to pay attention. You just want to, you don't want to waste your time going after those fringe cases. Really make sure that it aligns completely with your audience and that problem you're solving. It just gives you the biggest chance of success in making that kind of celebrity endorsement partnership happen. So next, I want to talk a little bit about data security. So being online at all, you have the risk of being hacked, having your customer data stolen. How do you deal with these types of issues if you're going to have an app for your business? So first, I want to talk about why data security matters. It encourages user trust and long-term brand loyalty. Of course, there's legal reasons if you're not compliant with regulations like GDPR. in Europe or CCPA, you can have fines. Thirdly, good business continuity. So security breaches will harm your reputation, as we've seen with large businesses all the time as they get hacked. And data breaches are very expensive, costing over 4 million at least globally in a short period of time. Small businesses are often targeted as well. We just don't hear about that. So these are all key reasons why you want to be looking closely at data security. And don't just leave it up to your app developer and say, hey, make sure this app is secure. And they say, sure, we got it. You need to know what they need to get and make sure that it's actually been done correctly. Not every app development team is as up to date on these as you would hope. So a few key things that you need to make sure are going to happen with your app is that any sensitive data, like the passwords or credit card, street address, you name it, it's got to be encrypted both at rest and in transit. So that just means when they've typed it into the app but not really clicked the submit button yet, and also once they've clicked the submit button. A couple of methods of doing that using this SSL encryption and encrypting sensitive data with a modern algorithm like the AES 256. Again, you don't need to be experts on these terms, but you should make sure that your development team follows them. Secondly, using secure authentication. So we've all seen multi-factor authentication, I think. It's when you put in your password and then it says, okay, I'm going to send you a text message and tell me the code. And then you put in the code and then it lets you log in. So that's multi-factor authentication. It's become more necessary as passwords have been hacked. And so if you are taking secure data, then it's a good idea to use MFA. And also limiting login attempts is another good way to secure the authentication. And lastly, data minimization. Only collect the data that you need to and that you care about. And also regularly review your your app's data collection practice. And so nobody likes their app to say, I'm collecting 50 pieces of data on you and I need access to all your phone's cameras and sensors. It's a bit of a risk, right? From the user's point of view, we probably all stopped installing an app at the point where we realized, oh, it's wanting access to like every single thing and I don't know why. So you will be presented with this choice when you develop your app. What data will you collect and what permissions will you need? So make sure it's the minimum, right? And that's not always easy to know what the minimum is, but you can talk to an expert or talk to someone like me and talk to your developers and just be clear that you're not collecting more data than you really need to. So that ends the presentation, and I hope it was useful in understanding this complex landscape of app development. And now I'd be happy to take your questions. I believe we've got about half an hour. So if we have that many questions, that'd be great. Thank you. I think you're still muted there, Sheila.
I I honestly clicked it. I just didn't click it in the right spot. Next time I should look when I do it, right? Okay, first question came in soon after you started. The question is, can you begin with PWA and later switch to the other platforms?
Right. So PWA was the Progressive Web App. It's a thing that's not really an app. It's a website that kind of pretends to be an app. No, I don't think you can switch. That is completely separate development path. So yeah, you would be writing an app from scratch if you decided to go with one of those other options.
See, next question. Which low code, no code platforms are easy to use and develop and complete good mobile apps?
That's a good question. It's been years since I've directly worked with any of those competitor no code, low code. So I don't have a recommendation to give right now. I would have to go do research and see, well, what's really the best now? Because the ones out 2 years ago, some of them don't exist anymore and others have morphed a lot. So I don't have an answer of which one I'd recommend, but I would probably search Google and just say like, what are the top 10 no code app development platforms for 2025, you'll find people who've done a lot of really recent reviews of them, and then you can make a decision based on reading a couple of those reviews.
When building for government customers, are there any major considerations for US versus offshore development we should be cautious of?
Oh, there might be. So if you're developing for the US government or any state or local agency, you might have regulations on, yeah, who can develop it for sure. And now, it'll depend, right? It'll depend on the jurisdiction you're under. So you'll need to research that. But in my experience, yes, there can definitely be limitations.
Um, is consumer WhatsApp an example of freemium app?
I think so. So WhatsApp is a communication app for texts and calls and messages and stuff. Um, I haven't had that installed in a year or more, so I don't really know currently what their revenue model is like. I believe it's pretty free though, so you can download it and use most of it. They might have in-app purchases. They might even have ads at this point, so I'm actually not sure of the current state of that app, but last I knew, I would have considered it a freemium app, yes.
What type of security measures should be utilized for medical information?
Great. So, I mean, this is definitely something that you want to conduct more research on than my simple answer, because I'm not an expert, but there's HIPAA, right? So HIPAA is the HIPAA is a law that specifies medical data and how it can be transmitted. So it's very relevant with apps taking medical data, and you need to be compliant with that. And there might be others. So I would do much more research into your specific niche, but at least you've got to comply with HIPAA.
Let's see. So this one's, I'm curious to know if a PWA has a user experience as an app or a website. What does the UX look like?
It's a great question. And because PWAs or these web apps are relatively new, it's still quite an evolving thing. But the current examples that I've seen are it's just like a website, but it can go full screen on your phone. So the border goes away. So you're not looking at your browser, you're just looking at the web page. And the page can be designed in such a way that it looks more or less like an app. So that's the main thing. How does the user get to it? Because it's not an app they download from the store. So they've got to get the link. It's just a website link, right? And so they can access it by either in their phone browser, they can open that link and it'll pop up and it can go full screen, like I said, or they can put a shortcut to that on their phone's home screen, and it can look like an app's icon. And it's just a link to the website. So those are two methods of launching that type of app.
Next question. You talked about wireframes for feedback before the development team, but how do you get user feedback on wireframe usability from potential users without a usable beta version?
Yeah, that's a great project. That's a great question. So, of the example wireframe platforms I gave, they both have the option to send out kind of like a unique link to people. And so once you build a wireframe, it can be even interactive. So you can have the phone screen mock-up, you can click on a button and the next screen appears. So it's kind of like you're interacting with the app, but it's in your web browser. You can send a link so people can test it out, and they can actually even give you feedback on that in that platform. So it's all built in. It's a nice feedback system built in because they know it's people like you who are going to build a wireframe and want to get feedback on it. So the feedback system's already built into both of those options. And I think all of the other leading wireframe options have a good feedback system built in as well. So you collect the feedback, you send out the link, you update the look of it, the functionality, you get more feedback. Yeah, it's just a process. And then once you feel good about it, you can give the final version of these wireframes to the developer and talk about it with them and say, hey, this is what I've come up with, and how much is it going to cost to develop? And then you can have really good conversations, and the developers appreciate that you've taken that time and really thought through a lot of those steps.
How do you balance marketing early versus exposing the idea for your app to the public for it to be copied or stolen?
Yeah. That's a good question. So if you have a really unique and proprietary idea, you feel like nothing like this app exists. And again, do some careful research because a lot of apps already exist. I've worked with business owners who had they thought a one of a kind idea, and we found out there were apps that did something very similar. But if you do have this unique app, yeah, you might not want people to find out about it ahead of time. In that case, the open beta test is not advisable because that whole point is you're sending it to random people to get feedback. The closed beta test would be better for you. You can still get feedback. You can build your app kind of in secret. And let's say you have a trusted network of people, you can then give them access through a closed beta test and have that beta test go as long as you need to get the feedback until you're satisfied the app is bug free, has the features that are working correctly and all of that. So that's my biggest recommendation. You don't want to get the beta out there to the people who you don't trust. In that case, you don't want to market it or advertise it before you're ready to launch it. It might slow down your user adoption, of course. In that case, you just would want a different type of marketing plan, which would say, we're not going to mention this to the public until it's released on version 1.0, and then we're going to have a lot of things happen all at once, right? We're going to have influencer interviews lined up. We're going to have blog posts already written, ready to be published, right? You're going to want to have a lot of things kick off all of a sudden to make up for the fact that you weren't able to market this at all during the development. So you can still have a successful launch, but you need to plan ahead and have everything start when you're ready to have it start. And it's still going to take the same amount of work, kind of lining all that up, I think, getting it ready.
So let's see, we've got quite a few more questions dropping in. So let's see. Next one, how do you put trust measures in place for offshore development?
The most common tactic is by having them sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. And every developer I've worked with, both in the US and offshore, is willing to do this. I do this when I'm brought into a development project. It's very common. It's a simple 1 or 2 page legal document. So the first thing is you would just have them sign that. And it basically means, at least in the US, it's a legally binding document. And if they took your idea and you found out about it, you could sue them and maybe win, it would be a legal process. If they're offshore, India, China, Eastern Europe, the validity of an NDA is weaker, right? It's just they're different legal systems and all that. So, and I'm not a legal expert. So there could be other recourses you could take if you really wanted to secure your idea, protect it while it's being developed overseas. I would talk to an attorney who specializes in that. The first step is always an NDA, which is very simple to get accomplished. In most cases, it's sufficient, but I think if you have further concerns or you want more safeguards, then you would talk to an attorney and see what your other options are.
For people with sensory disabilities, such as being blind or deaf, is there an app source that is better equipped to deal with accommodation issues?
So if I understand that question right, the user of the app might be blind or deaf, and you're wondering if one of the app stores is better equipped to handle an app that markets to that type of individual? Is that,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll
is
read
it
the
right?
question exactly, and
Yeah.
then if you still don't, we'll have Lori just ask that question again. For people with sensory disabilities, such as being blind or deaf, is there an app source that is better equipped to deal with accommodation issues? So I don't know if it means that
Um,
for creating the app or for
yeah.
using, maybe have Lori
Yeah.
expand on
I'm
that.
not clear on what the question is really. So
Okay,
maybe if Lori wants to give us more info.
okay. Let's see, how much ongoing development or redevelopment is needed with most apps? Is it annually or more often?
That's a really good question. Yes. If you build an app and 5 years later you've never updated it, it's probably not going to work anymore. And the reason is because the app might pull data from a server or, a cloud service and rely on different assets it's looking for on the internet. Well, those might change, break, or just those companies might go out of business. And so, yes, the app needs to be maintained as updates happen on the internet. Once a year is probably not sufficient. I mean, most apps, depending on the complexity, if it's a very simple app, you might only need to really worry about maintenance once a year. But most apps would be more like twice a year or even once every 3 months would be a good check. If you had a budget item that said, have your developers spend 1 hour every 3 months and check up on maintenance and security patches, that should be sufficient. But I do think you need to have it in your mind every 3 or 6 months to just do a security and maintenance check. If anything is found, like maybe they find something is broken or it's going to break soon, then they might have to rewrite code and go look for other options to fill that gap. And that might take more than an hour and cost more, but at least you have somebody checking it regularly.
Okay, so Lori has given us a little more information. So it says, are there groups or offshore app developers who are more skilled in producing apps with accommodations?
Okay. Oh, it's a great question. I don't know. I actually never had to focus on apps that accommodate individuals with those types of disabilities. So I have never worked with a development team that has that specific experience. I'm also I also think it doesn't come down to the market so much as what features your app is going to have to um, to work with those individuals. So, for example, if your app needs to have access to the microphone or the camera or some other audio visual item, then you want your developers to have experience working accessing the mic and the camera. So, I think you should think about what features the app is going to have to reach that market and to target them. And then you can ask the developers if they have experience with those hardware functions or those software functions. But let's think about it from a feature point of view, because I'm not sure what features your app would need, but it depends what it's trying to accomplish with those individuals. So, yeah, I think those are all good questions. And then you can find a development team that has experience with building those types of features.
Let's see, how do app stores charge in case of free apps, for example, private use apps for schools, churches, etc.?
So if your app has no in-app purchases or no subscriptions or it's free, then they don't make money from that part. The stores do charge a small fee. I think currently the Google Store is $100 for lifetime, and the Apple Store is maybe $100 per year, more or less. And so they're going to get their money that way, but they won't make money from your fees in the app because you're not making revenue from the app. So if your app is mainly, let's say, it's like a marketing thing, like a flyer, just giving information about your business, but you don't sell anything in the app, then you won't be charged fees because you're not making revenue from the app. You just be charged that initial fee, like I mentioned, for listing it in the store, which is about $100.
Does the price to develop an app also include the back end, cloud, setup, databases, etc., or generally just the app itself?
Generally together. So most apps need back-end stuff, databases, cloud storage, like you mentioned, all these things. A lot of apps have a user login. Well, all of those user logins and the passwords and stuff are stored in a database, and that's all back-end stuff. So yeah, most apps will have the back-end, and developers almost always will do both. So you'll probably receive, what I like to see is I receive a quote, here's the total. This is a breakdown between, this is what the front end is coming in at, this is what the back end development's coming in at, and there's different breakdowns of the price. It's almost always going to be done by the same developer.
Let's see. I've heard building a strong business team enhances the chances in gaining funding. How do you find a co-founder or build out team for your app? Find a good co-founder build out team
Yeah.
for your app.
Well, I do agree that having a good team with a proven track record of successfully building apps is very important when looking for funding, especially from angel investors and other investment groups like that. Even trying to get a loan from a bank, for example, they're going to want to see there's a team behind it with competency, skills in the right area, and success. So how do you go about finding a team or a co-founder? Networking. So I used to live in Charlottesville, Virginia. There's the Charlottesville Business Innovation Council, which is a group of local entrepreneurs and innovators and investors, and that was a great place to go and network and meet co-founders, right? Like that's what happened there. You had an idea, you met somebody who knew it or had some skills, they became a co-founder. I saw that happen every single year. So wherever you live, look for some sort of business council, startup council, even your local angel investment group, and network. There are some online platforms that kind of help find co-founders, but you know, when you're looking in all the people of the US or the world, there's just too many to sort through. But meeting somebody face to face at a networking event is by far the best way to get to know them, get some confidence in them, and they trust you. So I wouldn't even recommend bothering with online matchmaking things. There's so many, not just scams, but a lot of waste of time. I met people have gone down that road and thought they found a great co-founder only to, be very disillusioned a month later. So I'd recommend not even trying that. So yeah, go the local networking route. And if you're not sure what groups are in your area, then I would recommend you talk to your SBDC advisor, right? So for free, you can meet somebody at the SBDC. If you're up in Northern Virginia, then they're going to have connections with all of those local business groups. They could say, "Hey, here it is." Maybe they can even give you an introduction to somebody there, and then you can find out when their events are and go there and meet people in person.
Good advice. Okay, so Cameron, someone is asking, can you say the name of that organization again that you were just talking about?
Uh,
I know.
which one? I feel like I mentioned several.
I feel like you, so I think it's Elena. If you can elaborate a little bit on that question of which organization you're looking for, please. Let's see. So next question. I heard NDAs don't get signed by venture capitalists or investors. Don't sign it due to so many similar companies. How do I protect myself with this?
I think that's true. I have a little bit of experience working with angel investment groups, and I think you're right that they're not going to sign an NDA on like hearing a pitch for an investment opportunity because that could legally get them in hot water if, yeah, it's just tricky for an investor. For a development team, they should have no problem signing it because you're hiring them. But yeah, an investor relationship is different. I think you just would talk to that individual or that group and say, I understand why an NDA is not going to work for you, but what other ways do you protect my intellectual property? And of course, they get asked that all the time if they're serious investors, and they're going to have their process. Um, it just depends. I think it depends on which group and on how they do that. But any serious investor or a group will know a quick answer to that. And I think if they are not really sure, then it's not going to be a safe thing to even pitch to them.
Okay, so Elena was looking for the networking group that you went to. I think I was in Charlottesville.
Oh yeah, so that's called Charlottesville Business Innovation Council. It's CBIC, and they have a website.
Okay.
And Tracy Green is the leader of that, and she's really great. So you could look at their website. I know they generally have like a membership thing, so you would buy an annual membership and then be a member and be invited to all their events, and they have several a month. So it's a great organization. I used to volunteer there.
Great, thank you. And then someone actually just dropped that info into the Q&A. I'll put that into the chat in a moment. Let's see. So this is another question about PWA. I'm sorry to ask more on this subject. Do you need to purchase a website domain for a PWA?
You don't need to. You can have you need a space to have the website. So if you already have a domain, you could make, a subfolder and put your PWA anywhere. It just needs to have its own URL. So you could have its own dedicated domain or not. It can share a domain with another business that you might own. Yeah.
Okay. Second, let's see. Should I consider filing for a copyright?
Yeah, so because I'm not a legal expert, I don't really dive into answering questions about copyrights or other technical legal things. It depends a lot on your situation and what you're trying to achieve. So there might be somebody at your local SBDC who is like a legal expert, maybe a lawyer, a past or present lawyer you can talk to. If not, you're somebody at the SBDC near you can definitely recommend a good attorney to talk to that you could pay for. So I'd recommend you talk to them first.
Perfect. Let's see. Next question. Okay. Do you have any plans to conduct a hands-on workshop of building a mobile app using no code platform in the near future? Is that something you would do in this
It's the
format,
SBDC.
Cameron, or?
That's a good question. I mean, it's possible. You know, it takes a while to develop and think about a new presentation topic like that. A lot of slides to make, but it's something we would think about. It could be done in the fall, perhaps, or later this year. So if you're looking for something right away, it definitely won't be available right away. But there's going to be some pretty good tutorials, I think, on YouTube videos. So if you find a no-code platform you're kind of interested in, I think you could go on YouTube and find mini videos of people just like, hey, let's just walk you through how to use this platform. Let's build an app from start to finish. I mean, they might be an hour-long video, but so would my presentation. So I think if you want something right away, yeah, just look there. You'll probably find some good information. I usually am impressed with what I find.
That's a good tip. So let's see if we have one more question. Please explain B2B. I want to come up with a minimum viable product related to editing or technical manuscript editing, maybe for government related to international science or defense.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you know what B2B means. It's just business to business. And in your case, it might be B2G, which is business to government, if that's your main client. Um, but yeah, I think that answering the question is I don't really have enough information to go on. And I think also, I mean, to develop an app to meet those, to kind of serve that product and that market, I think it would be a longer discussion than we would probably have time for. I mean, if you have a really specific question, you could ask it. But yeah, I think that's something, and we can, you know, if you want to talk to me about it more offline, then feel free to email the address here on the screen, which is help at Virginia's SBDC.org.
Yep.
And then
So,
you can get connected to me that way.
right. So Rachel, if you want to reach out, you can send that. Oh, she might not need an app at all. You must have given a lot of good information for her to figure that out.
Well,
So
that's
thanks,
good. You know,
Rachel.
sometimes the best decision is you don't need an app at all. Yes.
There you go. Okay, do we have any more questions? We do have, let's see, about 10 minutes. So while we're waiting, Cameron, if you want to give us some last words of wisdom.
Sure. Oh, that's been great questions, and I appreciate everybody's, you know, interest and participation in the topic. Yeah, I think app development is evolving very rapidly. AI, I mean, maybe next year you won't even hire a developer because you'll just tell an AI. In fact, I have some friends who are developers who are using AI to write apps for their clients, and you know, they're doing them 10 times faster than without AI, meaning AI is doing most of the work. So yeah, AI is definitely going to change this up, but I think if you need an app in 2025, you'll be working with a developer most likely who's going to be using AI most likely, but that's fine. But in the future, I think you as the customer will just really be making apps directly with AI and cutting out the developer, which will make it very, very much cheaper.
And someone is asking how long until the recording is available. So I'll answer that one. I will be uploading it to YouTube this afternoon. So it will probably be edited by later today or tomorrow on YouTube. And then I will be sending out an email that has a link to that recording probably by tomorrow. So let's see. Next question. Can you recommend any developers in the US?
Yes, that's I'm happy to. I get asked that pretty frequently after these presentations. Email Sheila at help@virginiasbdc.org. She can then forward me your name and your question, and I can send that to you directly.
Perfect. Okay. I don't see any other questions dropping in. So I will go ahead and wrap us up. Cameron, thank you. Thank you for all the updates too that you provide us every time you present. We appreciate those. I want to thank also everyone who joined us today. And a reminder, you will receive that email with a link to the recording and the slides, hopefully by tomorrow. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. You can sign up for a free and confidential advising session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And I think we might have had, let's see if we had any more questions. A lot of thank yous. I agree. Oh, here we do have a question. How long from idea to actual development does it take to launch an app normally?
That's another really good question, and I usually do get asked that too. It does completely depend on the complexity of the app. So a very simple app, the soonest you're probably going to get it built realistically is going to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but it'd be a very simple app. And it also assumes that you're going to decide on a development team really quickly. Just the development alone is probably a week to 2 weeks for a simple app. So the longer it takes you to start with the development team, the longer it'll take. I think realistically, most apps is going to be between 2 and 4 months, including time to beta test, including some time to take feedback and incorporate it. Because again, an app that's built fast is probably not incorporating much user feedback, if at all. It's not going to be as successful, most likely. So the best apps are going to have time to incorporate user feedback, get some testing done, get some more feedback, right? That's the MVP cycle that I showed. So aiming for pure speed is probably not going to get you the best app, but aiming for between 2 and 4 months, realistically, for a moderately sized app is going to be a good ballpark.
Great. Okay, and with that, I will end us here. And I just want to remind everyone that there is the session coming up on March 27th with AI, which I think is a wonderful follow-up to this presentation. So we hope you will join us then, and we hope you all have a wonderful week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.